So with the use of our time today, I'm going to be showing you some tips and tricks on how to do a still life. This is something that I think is an incredibly important foundation and skill to have. Whether you are primarily a sketch artist or illustrator, or if you're a painter. This is something that helps progress your skills in regardless of the medium that you use. So Jessica went over the materials that we have. Jessica, if you could just switch my camera to the desk view.
Yes, absolutely. Give me 1 second. Technical difficulties. There we go.
There we go. Okay. Okay, so the materials that I'm using, so I'm gonna have my Strathmore drawing. I'm gonna have one sheet of that. That's for our final sketch. So that will be for the apple still life. And then I have two sheets of sketch paper. And the reason we have both is because sketch paper has a little bit more tooth to it. And it's a little bit lighter weight than drawing paper. So this will be really good for preliminary work and practice. And then some of the drawing tools that I have an eraser that you'll see is a lot smaller. The reason being is I cut my erasers into pieces so that I have different edges to work on. So I have a more detailed edge here, and then I have flatter edges if I need to do some larger erasing. I also have a kneadable eraser. The kneadable eraser is really great for really soft blended erasing. It's really great with charcoals because with charcoals, you pick up quite a lot of pigment. So when it does get dirty, you can just kind of fold it in and then you have a fresh side. And then the other drawing materials that you have in your kit, you have a Princeton Select blender brush. It's a little bit more of a stiff bristle and it's a short bristle. So this is really great for shading. The Select brushes, because they're all synthetic, even the ones that are a little bit more of a softer bristle, blend charcoal and carbon pencils really beautifully. The pencils that I'm going to work with are our Lyra Rembrandt Carbon Extra Dark. The Carbon Extra Dark is the darkest carbon pencil that you can get on the market. When we were formulating these pencils, we were working really closely with an artist. His name is Emmanuel Dasciano. If you haven't seen his work before, he does all our packaging on the Lyra products and he's fantastic. This is, believe it or not, this is a drawing, not a photograph. So he does some really, really spectacular work. I invite you to look at his work, but that's one thing that Lyra does really well is when they're going through the process of developing products, they get the artist's feedback during the process. Because ultimately that's the only opinion that matters, right? So this is our extra dark. I'm also working with our Lyra Rembrandt art design. This is our graphite series. So I have the 3B here. And then I have a few other tools that aren't included in your kit. I have a charcoal 2B. So this is a really good mid-grade. I also have a 2H, and you'll see I have this sharpened extremely pointy, and I'll explain why a little bit later. And then I have some blending tools. So I have some paper towel. I have a tortillon, but I can show you some tricks if you don't have one to create your own. So what we're going to start with is I'm just going to go a little bit further into some of the basics because the objective today, I want to give you all the tools that you need and kind of you can think of it as a warm up before we get into the drawing. So what I'm going to start with is just a little bit of an introduction on some different papers that you can use. So the types of papers that you use really influence what your final artwork is going to look like. So some illustration artists really like working on actually a heavyweight watercolor paper, which you absolutely can do, but they like that because of the soft surface. So I'm just going to show you just for texture purposes what it would look like. So you'll see different brushes of graphite pencils. So you'll see with a smooth surface, you get a smoother finish with just picking up a little bit of texture. The more texture in your work, when you move to more of a pastel paper or a watercolor paper, those are more textured because they are designed to hold more medium. So for watercolors, it's designed to hold more pigment and more water and more have more absorbency. And for pastel paper with dry pastels, charcoals, etc., it has to hold on to a lot of pigment. So a lot of the time, those papers have kind of a honeycomb texture or a sanded tooth, so it can really grip the pigments. But you'll see if I was working and I was doing a more realistic painting or sorry, a more realistic drawing, I wouldn't necessarily want to use a rough texture because that texture would show through the paper. If you're doing something more realistic, you want as smooth a paper as possible. So the best papers that you can use for that are a drawing paper or a Bristol paper. So that's for just going off the texture of paper. There's also different colors that you can use, which would influence your work. So I have a few examples here, and you can see there's a lot of different toned papers out there. Strathmore makes a toned gray paper, and a lot of the time I hear from artists that are wanting to experiment with colored paper. Well, how do I do this? How do I work with my values? And it basically becomes somewhat like your midtone. So just as an example, so this is the tone gray, this is the mixed media pad, and it's fantastic. It's a really smooth surface. But how I would work on this if I was doing a still life is this is now my mid-tone. So what I would incorporate, I would still use the same materials, but I would also incorporate, say, a white pencil crayon to use as my highlight. So it's just something to think about. And it's really easy. A lot of people think, oh, well, I have to use, if I'm going to use this paper, that's like my final piece paper. I can't experiment on this paper. It's intimidating. We automatically think that it's a little bit nicer than like our drawing paper, our typical drawing paper, but it's great to practice on this paper and get used to working on different tones. So no need to be intimidated by it. It's really fun to work on. And now just quickly moving into some of the tools that we're working on. So the difference between a charcoal, a carbon, and a graphite is your graphites will essentially build your framework when you're working. So you'll use this for your initial sketches, but you can also use this because it has a reflective finish. You want to take advantage of that when you're working, say, if you're doing a portrait and you're doing the fleshy areas of the face, so the tip of the nose and the T-zone, those areas of the face would have a little bit more of a gloss to it. And similarly, like we're doing today, is working with an apple, and you can see it's a lot shinier of a surface. So I'm going to teach you how to layer with graphite. So you're not only trying to replicate what the object looks like, but you're also trying to get that finish. And then we have our charcoal. So it's the 2B specifically that I'm going to be using. And the reason being there's an HB scale. And for anyone that isn't familiar with that, it's how hard or soft the pencil or drawing material is. So therefore how light and dark it is. So typically it starts from your 9H to your H is your lighter, so your harder graphite. Um, F and HB is your middle ground. So this is more balanced range. And then you have your B to 9B, which is your soft. So this is really dark. So the charcoal that we're using, this is great. Charcoals are typically a little bit more of an expressive medium to use. They're a lot softer, so they're really blendable. They're also matte and they help build a lot of life and contrast into your work. And then we have the carbon extra dark. This is probably my favorite to work with because it is incredibly rich. It's a really, really deep matte black. So we'll use this a lot for our shadow tones. But you'll see when we go throughout the process how you can strategically layer this with graphite to give some shine to what, say you're working on a vase, whatever still life you have as your reference, or a spoon is another really good one. That will be a helpful tip. And if you do make a mistake, you can really lift a lot of pigment. So I've just shown a small example here of charcoal, carbon, and the carbon extra dark. You can lift a lot of that pigment off if you need to. To do that, I would first use the kneadable eraser and I wouldn't rub. I would just kind of press it into the paper and that will lift off some of the pigment. And then you can go in with your other eraser and lift more if you need to. But less abrasion to the paper, the better. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to do kind of a warm-up exercise. And if you've been on any of my demos before, I always start out with a warm-up. And the reason being, I think of it a lot like if you were going for a run, you would do some stretching first. So I think about art in the same way. And it makes going into your final work a lot less intimidating because you're prepared and you're no longer just experimenting. So you're going to take your sheet of sketch paper and we're going to do first an exercise just for you to get to know the products a little bit. All I want you to do is swatch the materials. So I'm going to take the graphite pencil first and kind of using the side, not the point. I'm going to hold it pretty parallel to the paper and I'm going to use a harder pressure to start. And we're going to make gradient effects. So harder pressure. And then as you move down the paper, just start to shift into a lighter pressure. And you'll see, especially when you move to the lighter pressure, you can really see some of the texture. Even though it's really fine on a sketching paper, you can still see it. So that is our graphite. And now we're going to move into the charcoal. So you'll see I'll move my phone in a little closer here. So you'll see just off that line how much powder and how much material is coming off. So the charcoals are really, really soft. So I'm still using a heavier pressure here and then lighter pressure as I work down. And now I'll go in with my carbon extra dark. And now all I'm going to do is I'm just going to get to know each one. So I'm going to go in with my kneadable eraser in one area of my swatch and lift off as much as possible. And then I'm going to go in with a little bit of my eraser and I'm going to try to just focus this just on one side of my swatch because I want the other side to stay clean so that I can try a couple different shading techniques. So you'll see even with the graphite how much I lift off just with the kneadable eraser. And as the kneadable eraser gets dirty, you can just fold it in and then you have a clean side. These are also really great for creating different shapes. If you do need to lift off any small details, you can make a little bit of a point and then you can carve out some details in your sketches. So as I mentioned, the kneadable eraser is designed for lifting pigment and giving it more of a soft finish, whereas the vinyl eraser will lift a lot more pigment. It's just slightly more abrasive on the paper. So now there's a few different ways that you can do blending. So the brush that we have, this is a really great tool, especially if you don't want to use your fingers. I see a lot of people using your fingers, but then the problem is you go into your work and then you have fingerprints everywhere. So I always advise against that because there are so many great tools that you can use. So that's with the brush on the graphite. This is the brush and the charcoal. So the charcoal you'll find is very easy to blend. It's very expressive, very pigmented. It's a lot softer of a medium to work with. And the carbon. There's also the tortillon, which you can use. What I'll sometimes do, and the reason you have two sheets of paper, is if you want to just take a small corner, show you here, rip a small corner, and you roll it into a cone, and there you go. There's a homemade one. And because you have that point, that'll give you a lot of precision too. You could do the same thing with paper towel as well. This would just give you a lot smoother of a blend. You see, I'm doing the same thing. I'm going to roll it up. And you wouldn't have as much precision because it's softer, but you can see I get more of a diffused blend with the paper towel. And then you have the tortillon, which just saves you from having to make it. And I like working with this just because it's longer, so it feels more like it feels more natural in your hand. Feels like you're just holding a pencil. And I actually like so this one I've used quite a bit, and I actually like when it is more used because you keep some of those pigments on the tortillon, so you can actually use it for more subtle areas just to add a little bit of pigment. So one more exercise that we're going to do just before we get into the still life is I want to do a quick sphere because ultimately that is the shape that we're, if you have an apple as your reference, that's the shape that we're going to be working on. So all I want you to do is what I did was just grab a glass and you'll get your pencil and I just want you to draw a circle. And when you're drawing a still life, there's 5 things to look out for. So I've done a simple in the pictures that you received in the reference pictures, you'll see it's a very simple light point. So I have the light coming from the left side of the paper. So my highlight is on the left. And then I have my mid-tone in here. This is my core shadow. And then there's always a reflective light. So a light just under the ball here. It's not just a edge to edge. And then we have the cast shadow. So regardless of the still life that you're working on, you will always have that. If you have multiple light sources, then it may vary, but the best way to start out is try to limit your light source to just one, just so you can get a feel for it. I'll move this out a little bit. So you should have your circle drawn, and I'm just going to draw a table in the back here, just so we know where to put our cast shadow. So I'm starting with the graphite, and what I'm going to do, so this is my 3B. All I'm going to do is using a very light pressure and the side of my pencil, I'm shading almost parallel, is you want to almost shade in little circles. And this way you get a really even finish. Zoom in a little more so you can see. So you see how I'm shading, just using little circles. And I'm not really using my wrist, I'm using my whole arm. Okay, so I'm gonna do this really lightly. I'm gonna try to avoid the highlight area right here, but I'm gonna shade the whole sphere. And we're doing this for a couple reasons. So the reason I'm starting with graphite is because one, it's a good framework, but two, because we're working from a smoother object, having the graphite, because it's reflective, will be really useful. So not only will it look like the object, but it'll also give the it'll make it become more realistic. So even working towards the right side of my sphere, I'm still using really light pressure. It's the same pressure throughout the whole sphere. Okay. So I'm done with my graphite. And then I'm going to go in with my charcoal. If at any point you need to sharpen your charcoals or your carbons, just be really careful when you're sharpening them because they are such a delicate medium. When you're sharpening them, you don't need to press. So the Lyra Monochrome sharpener is great because it's larger, so it'll fit these pencils. But all you're doing is really lightly, like I'm not pushing on the pencil at all. I'm just lightly sharpening. And you'll see oftentimes what I do when I am working is I'll kind of rotate the pencil, just so I get different sides and I'm keeping my point the whole time, um, instead of just flattening down one area. So same thing, we're gonna use circular motions and a really, really light pressure. And if you find there you do have some edges already on your pencil, I just go in one area, one separate paper, and I'll rotate the charcoal around so that I get my point again and that it's all even. If I'm doing the same thing using graphite, then I'll usually use a more abrasive surface like a sandpaper. But for these, because they're so soft, paper works just fine. So same thing, I'm gonna use that circular motion. And I want to start establishing my midtone. So I'm gonna work from the outside in and just really, really lightly layer on a darker layer. So here I would have my cast shadow, and that's what I would use for my with my carbon. So we're gonna leave that for now. And you'll see in the chat there was an image that was included. It's both of an apple and there's another more um, shapely image. It's this one here. So these are really great tools that you can use for when you're doing still life because you can, especially if you're a beginner, because it'll show you the different values. So in case you're wondering what that is, that's just an extra tool that you can use for when we get to the apple. And you'll see regardless of the layer that we're on, you are still using that same pressure throughout the whole project. So whether you're starting on the light midtones or the dark darks, you're never alternating your pressure. And what I find this does is when you're building layers, instead of trying to get your darks in as soon as possible, it creates more depth and gives you a more realistic finish. It's a slower process, but it's therapeutic. At least I think so. So I've got my mid-tone down, and now I'm just going in and I'm adding some of my core shadow. So where the core shadow is, it'll be right above where the reflective light is and just under your mid-tone. Now the fun part. So I'm going to do a little bit of blending on here. And what you can do, if you are worried about smudging and laying your hand down on the paper, you can always get a spare piece of paper and just put it where your hand is resting. That way, the oils from your hand won't transfer onto your paper. I don't typically do that when I'm just doing preliminary sketch work and warm ups, but when you get to your final drawing, that's not a bad idea to have that. Even if you just have cartridge paper, that works. That works perfectly. Or paper towel works as well. And you'll see I'm bringing some of this, even though I don't have any pigment in my highlight. Now that I have some color on my blending tool, I'm just bringing that a little bit into my highlight just to create a more seamless blend. You'll notice as we work through the process, I'll use a lot of blending techniques at the beginning when we're just kind of establishing the form. But then as we get further along and we're doing the final touches, you're not really blending at that point because you almost want a little bit of texture and a little bit more detail at the end. Okay, so we have a pretty good framework here. Now we're gonna go in with our extra dark, and that's where we're really gonna add some more depth to the work. We're using a very, very light pressure. So I'm gonna start with my core shadow here. And still that same motion, just small circular motions. And you'll see just by barely adding anything, that's already starting to really take its shape. And you wanna make sure you'll see I'm kind of exaggerating the lines here a little bit between my highlight, my midtone, and my core, and I'm doing that so you can see I'm not when I'm shading, I'm not doing it in straight lines like this between my midtone and my shadow and my highlight, because you have to remember that you're working on a sphere. So all of your lines will be, in that form, in a more curved form. Okay, I've got my dark darks in there, and now I'm gonna start layering. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go back in with my charcoal, and by layering my charcoal over my carbon, it'll smooth it out a little bit more and fill in some of those, lighter areas. So see how that already smoothened out that without having to use a blending tool, and I'm still using a light pressure. I'm gonna go in, I'm gonna blend. I'm gonna use the tortillon just because my edges here, I want a little bit more precision. And even with the tortillon, I'm really using it like it's just another pencil or a charcoal. I'm using a circular motion to blend some of my pigments and a really light pressure. And by using kind of the side of the tortillon instead of the point, you would get more of an even finish rather than just like the point. Now I'm just gonna go in with my kneadable eraser and just really slowly brush some of the areas around my highlight just to make it a little bit softer. So similar to how we built up the sphere, with the cast shadow, it's a little bit different. So rather than starting with the graphite, we're gonna go right in with the extra dark. What you can do if you're more comfortable is take a pencil, just your graphite, and you can map out where you want your cast shadow. So you wanna refer to your still life when you're doing your cast shadow. So I'm just gonna really, really lightly map it out. And then I'm gonna go in with my charcoal and I'm gonna start at the base and still use that light pressure. And if we're using a single light source, this casting shadow would be pretty defined. So there's not much of it that would be diffused. It would be a strong shadow. Okay, so I've done one layer of my carbon and I'm gonna take my tortillon and I'm gonna blend it out. And then I'm gonna go back in, I'm gonna do a layer of carbon again. Still with a light pressure, you're always using the same light pressure. And then over top of that, I'm gonna use my charcoal, and this will just help bring it all together and smooth it out. And the reason I'm not using any graphite on this layer is because I don't want this layer to be shiny. I want it to be really matte because it'll push things back in my drawing rather than bring things forward. So this last fun tool, this is one that I keep as kind of my final touches. So this is something I'll only really use if I'm doing, like I said, those fleshy areas of a face, or if I'm doing something that has a little bit more shine to it, like an apple. So what you're gonna do is you'll notice on your page when you go closer to your highlight especially, you'll see some of the white of the paper. This is a little bit tedious, but the results that you get from this is well worth it. So all you're gonna do is you're gonna push some of the graphite into those white areas. And this will give you a really, really seamless and polished finish, especially if your goal is for it to be really realistic. This technique is an incredible technique. This is actually a technique that Emmanuel Dasciano uses, the artist that I showed you here. So I did a workshop with him, oh gosh, 6 years ago, and just for the pupil of an eye, he used this technique and it took him 3 hours to finish the eye. But it was well worth it. So all you're going to do is you're using the tip, and the reason you sharpen it this way, so you could sharpen it with an X-Acto knife. There are sharpeners that you can actually buy that would get you this effect. But if you don't have that, you can use an X-Acto knife. And then your goal is to get the graphite to a cone shape with a really, really long point. And the nice thing about these pencils is these have a break resistant core. So when you do spend a long time making these, the break resistant core does come in handy because you don't want it to break and then you have to start all over again. So I'm going to push some of this graphite into those white areas, and this will give you a really airbrushed like finish. And because it's reflective, it'll also lend itself well for if you're doing objects that are naturally more satin or shiny. And you'll see if you tilt your page as you're working, then you can really start to see that reflectiveness. So this is a step that does take a long time, but important to show you that step. We are going to move on to the apple. So if you're not done this, this is okay. This is just a warm up, so you can always go back to it. So I'm going to grab my drawing paper now. My apple is going to roll down my drafting board. So what you're going to start off with is if you're using my reference, is your graphite pencil, and you're just going to lightly sketch out a sphere. And the reason we're starting out with a complete sphere is because at this point, you just want to map out the general shape. And this would be the same regardless of any object. So for an apple, it would be a sphere. So it can be rough. And then what you're going to do is when you're looking at a still life, and the reason it's important to be working from a still life in person rather than from a picture is because you see the form a lot differently. So the trick when you are working from a still life is you want to kind of take away the fact that you are drawing an apple. You want to just look at it like it's you want to draw the negative space essentially. So you want to work from just the contours of your object. So looking at my apple, so very lightly sketching this in, I'm just trying to turn my sphere into more of that apple shape. So I'm just working around the contour. So it's fuller at the top, and then it tapers down. And then what you can do is you can remove some of your old lines from your initial form. So I'm just using my vinyl eraser. Now I'm just gonna draw in kind of where it dips at the top of the apple for my stem. So before we start shading, we just wanna, again, refer back to our sphere. So remember that you're gonna have to establish your highlight, your midtone, your core shadow, your reflective light, and your cast shadow. So there's an image that was sent in. It was the first reference image that was sent, where I've actually mapped out where those are on my reference point. So you'll see, similar to the sphere, I have the highlight as a single source coming in from the left-hand side, my midtone just under that, then my core shadow. My reflective light is more focused on the bottom of the apple, and then my cast shadow on the right-hand side. So similar to how we started shading the sphere, we're going to start with our graphite, our 3B, still using those circular light motions, but you'll see my highlight is around here. So it's not quite at the edge. So I'm going to avoid that area. And you'll see I'm holding my pencil towards the end of the pencil. And what I find that does, I'm still not working with my wrist, I'm working by moving my arm. But what I find that does is it balances out the pressure that I'm using. Because if I'm working like this, then I find I am too detail oriented and I don't have as much control over the pressure that I'm using.
Kelly, do you have any tips for how not to smear your work as you're clearing it off? Do you use a drafting brush or?
Yeah, so I actually just blow on the paper. But when you're doing so, especially if you're using the charcoal, you don't because you don't want to get your oils from your hands on the paper, but you also don't want to just get your hands all dirty. So what I'll typically do is I'll hold up my page vertically and then I'll blow on it. And I'll just put like a towel or something down so that any of those pigments can just fall.
Yeah.
I find when you're working with a lighter pressure, you're not generating as much dust, which is really nice too. And I'll use these same techniques if I'm working with coloring pencil, if I'm working with pastels. It's all very similar.
This is a great question. How do you avoid sharp lines when you turn your pencil while shading?
Oh, that's a really great question. So what I'll do, similar to what I was doing earlier, so when you do find you're getting those sharp lines, just get a spare piece of paper, a scrap piece of paper, and I'm rotating my pencil in my hand onto my paper when I'm doing this. And this will help establish that cone shape again. And you'll want to actually look at it when you're doing it to make sure that you're getting that cone shape and that you're not just getting lines. Okay, there we go. And what also helps is you want to hold your pencil as parallel to the page as you can so that you're getting the broad area of the graphite, not the point. So still with the graphite, I'm just establishing my mid-tone and I'm just getting that reflective layer down. So same even pressure over the whole apple. I'm only leaving the highlight area on the top left. Also, don't feel like you need to rush your apple. This is your final work. And the sphere is very similar. That demonstration will help you through how to do, how to complete the apple. So just take your time with it. And I'll just add my stem here since I haven't yet. So I'm just lightly mapping that in. Okay, so now that we've laid down our graphite layer, we're going to do the same thing as we did for the sphere. And we're going to go in with our charcoal, really light pressure again. So I'm going to roll this one out so I get my cone shape. It's funny how similar drawing and painting is. When I'm painting, you typically spend more time on your palette and mixing colors than you do on the actual painting. And I think this is similar in that way, where you're prepping tools before you go on to your final work. Okay. The technique that I've been showing you is how to create a realistic photo by using blending. There are also other ways of shading. You could do cross hatching. And essentially, what cross hatching yeah, is a different kind of value scale. So it's different lines. So you'll see how I created a gradient effect here just by using more lines as I get to my darker value. So in this first layer here, this would be more my highlight, and then I would move into my mid-tone using 2 lines, 3 lines, and then 4 lines. So you could use that technique as well.
Kelly, when you're coming to the edge of the, of the apple, are you
Mhm.
putting in just stopping? Are you putting in some sort of hard line or blending?
So you want to try and avoid hard lines, although so you'll see in the sphere I do have a hard line. That was just for the exercise. Throughout your drawing, you want to try and avoid hard lines until you get to the final layers where you're just putting in details. So, for example, when I'm doing the stem, I'll do more hard lines. But when I'm going to the edge, I'm still using that exact same pressure that we've been doing. I'm just shading as close to the edge as I possibly can. If you don't get to the edge, then you can always use the tortillon to just blend it out further. So that's what I'm going in and doing next. Now that I've kind of established my charcoal where I'd have some of my deeper tones, I'm going in with the tortillon, and because this already has pigment on it, I can really push that out a little bit more.
Along those same lines, if you've gone too hard in an area or you have made too much of a hard line, can you just lift off with the kneaded eraser or
Yeah, so I would lift off using the knead eraser just by pushing it into the paper. And then if you still find you need to lift off a little bit more, you can use your vinyl eraser. So when I'm using the tortillon for this step, you'll see that I'm really focusing where I put the charcoal. So I'm doing that first, and then I'll blend that out a little bit further into where my reflective light and my highlight is. So you'll see how just with the leftover pigment on the tortillon, I'm blending up into my mid-tone, going right into my highlight to just soften those lines. And just for time's sake, I'm gonna do half of the apple here, that half of it blended, just so I can show you. And I'm going in with my carbon extra dark. So this is over top of my charcoal, and I'm just, again, with that light pressure, I'm deepening my shadow area, so where my cast shadow is. Or sorry, my core shadow. Usually a still life like this can take you anywhere between a few hours to most of the day. So to really take your time with it. Um, Hopefully, the tools that I've shared with you on shading will help you in creating more realistic still lifes and just help to grow your own practice. So I'm adding the Carbon Extra Dark to deepen my shadows, and then similar to what we did before, I'm going back in with my charcoal, same pressure, and adding that over top of where I've put my core shadow. So you're really working, you're going back and forth between using materials. Your carbons and your charcoals, you want to focus on your deeper areas, and your graphite keep reserved for your more highlighted areas. I'm just going to put my cast shadow in here. So I'm just going to draw where my table is. And same thing, I'm not going to use any other graphite besides just mapping where I want my cast shadow to go. So starting with my extra dark, because this will be my darkest area. And then deepening that shadow with my charcoal. And then you just continue to build these layers with your light pressure. Now I'll quickly just show you the stem with the time that we have left. So I wouldn't bother using my carbon extra dark in this area because it is a relatively light area. So this would be, the stem would be my midtones to my highlights. So along the left side of the stem is where my highlight will be. And then so I'm just starting off, I'm going in with my graphite and just doing the framework. So just like we did for the apple. And then I'll go in with my charcoal, try to get it to a sharp point. And you're just going to lightly press the pencil in the areas towards the top of the stem and the bottom. but still leaving the left side of the stem as your highlight.
Kelly, can you hold up the picture for an image so we can see where the line work is going?
So you'll see, so I started off with the graphite. The left side is still highlight. And then I focus the charcoal both on the top of the stem, because if you look at the picture, there's some more shadow in that area and towards the base of the stem.
Great, thank you.
And as you continue to build your charcoals and build your layers, once you get to the final step where you're happy with your values, that's when you would go in with this pencil and add more detail, add more reflective areas. So just by what I was saying earlier, just pushing some of that graphite in some of your mid-tone areas, even in some of your core shadow, because when you move your image, it'll give it a little bit more of a reflective look and give the texture of an apple. Are there any other questions about the products, about the process?
Let's see, does anyone have any questions? It doesn't look like anyone's has the questions. Everyone's looking diligent, hard at work. Oh, wait, no. Do you leave the table's edge just as a line?
No, so that's just the framework. So I just input that when before I put in my cast shadow. It depends on the background that you want to do. For what I'll usually do for backgrounds is I'll use a powder charcoal. So I won't use the pencils. I'll use a powder charcoal and I'll use paper towel or a brush so that I get a really soft finish. This is just because I don't want it to take away from the detail that I've done in my foreground. But really depends on what you want your background to look like.
Great. And if you don't have powdered charcoal, you could use an X-Acto and scrape them off.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Great. Well, Kelly, I want to say this has been a fantastic event. Thank you so much for joining us. We love having you. Everyone here at Plaza loves having you. And um, I still have another question, though. Beatrice is saying, I use mixed media paper. Do I need the exact paper?
No, mixed media paper is great. Most mixed media paper is relatively smooth because it's designed to handle dry media and wet media. So that's perfectly fine. And you can use whatever paper you want. It will just change how your artwork looks.
Great. Well, again, thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who's participated. And thank you to Strathmore and Lyra for giving us these samples. And I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon, and we will see you all again soon. Great
Thank you so
afternoon.
much for having me.